welcome to this public lecture of the Centre de Recherche Mathématique. Ivan and I, we always have the trouble of, Ivan is the co-organizer with me, of choosing the lecturer. And then when we travel around the world, we ask the people who are the good lecturers. So this summer I was in Korea and I was told that the best lecturer I could invite was in fact just a couple of hours from Montreal in Burlington. So tonight we have the pleasure of welcoming Chris Danfus. So Chris he made his PhD in the University of Maryland in 2006. And his work was on the chaotic dynamics in meteorology and climate. So he's still, this is an active part of his research program. He's a member of the Mathematics Climate Research Network in the United States. So after his PhD, he moved to Vermont, and at the University of Vermont, so he's interested in many things. I should say the common thread in all his career is that he's interested to large-scale systems and applications in sociology, in ecology, in meteorology. So he's the co-director of the Computational History Lab. He has a blog, so I invite you to visit his blog. And he's very popular among the media, so he had some interview with New York Times, BBC. And tonight we have the pleasure to have him tell us about measuring emotional states in real. So Chris.
Thank you. Thank you. Everybody hear me? Yep. I sound very loud. Thank you, Christian. Thank you, Yvonne, for dinner. It was wonderful to meet you guys today. And thank you all for coming tonight. I'm going to talk to you about this really exciting project that we've been working on for 6 or 7 years now, trying to build a new instrument, a new kind of instrument. And it'll have a dial, because any good instrument has a dial. And we're trying to measure something that has been important for a long time, but that's hard to measure. And that's how well people are doing. For a long time, there have been proxies like how much money are we making and how much are we exporting and importing that have been used to try and decide how well a society is functioning. And you may have heard of this concept of gross national happiness. We were talking about it earlier. And the goal is to apply some mathematical and statistical techniques to a lot of the large-scale electronic text that's available through the internet today to understand what's going on in real time. You've probably heard of examples where this technology is being used by people like Google to decide where the next flu outbreak is going to happen. People are trying to learn whether or not patterns of mobile phone communication and movement can predict where something like Ebola is going to spread to next. And my goal tonight is to kind of expose you to our efforts in this arena. And it's kind of a fun application of mathematics and probably different than something you've seen before. So this is the plan. We have a research group at the University of Vermont, and we have a mascot. So our mascot is the Roboctopus, and it's a robot octopus here. He's got an Iron Man suit on, and he's got the steampunk goggles, and he can program, and he can write papers, and he can build beautiful visualizations online. And this is my favorite mathematical equation, so I have to start every talk with that one. Okay, so what's the plan? The plan is to talk about why this is important, why it's a good idea to measure how happy people are. So I'm not going to attempt to tell you how happy you are, but we're looking at large groups, large populations of people. There's a whole field of what's called sentiment analysis that attempts to take a sentence and decide, how happy or sad is this sentence. And that's not what we're doing. You'll get a feel for why what we're doing is different than that. So my plan is to tell you about our instrument, what the dial is and how it works, and then show you some of the things that we've been measuring. Some fun things and some more serious things. That's the plan. Okay, so why is this important? This is Alan Greenspan. He's the chairman of the Federal Reserve. Back in 2007, he's being interviewed. And I'm just going to read you the quote from this interview to give you a sense for why we think this is an important problem to be thinking about. So what he says, I've been dealing with these big mathematical models of forecasting the economy. If I could figure out a way to determine whether or not people are more fearful or changing to more euphoric, I don't need any of this other stuff. I could forecast the economy better than any way I know. So this is an enormous statement from the person in charge of the financial system in the U.S., saying that really he would really just like to know how people are feeling, because that would tell him a lot of information, useful information about where the stock market's going to go. So he continues, the trouble is we can't figure that out. I've been in the forecasting business for 50 years. I'm no better than I ever was, and nobody else is. Forecasting 50 years ago was as good or as bad as it is today. And the reason is, the human nature hasn't changed. We can't improve ourselves. This is a talk about happiness, and this is the low point in the talk about happiness right now. You contrast this with something like weather prediction, which is the field that I started in, and there's been an enormous amount of improvement. So the forecasts today for, let's say, 5 days are as good as the forecasts 20 years ago were for 1 day. So we've made enormous improvements in things like being able to tell whether it's going to rain several days from now. But not in economics. We can't improve ourselves, our forecasts. This was an interview on the Jon Stewart show, and John reacted kind of surprised that the man in charge of the big lever would respond so candidly. So there's a gap here. There's a gap in understanding about how people are doing, and it's an important question. So what can we measure really well? Well, we can measure things that are related to how much we sell, how much we buy, how much we make. So there's this gross domestic product. And if I were in charge of the country, this is something, because it's easy to measure, there's a lot of importance usually attached to it. But we'd also like to have some other things that we look at. And there are things like consumer confidence. But if you're flying the plane, you really just don't want to know how fast you're going. You want to know, well, how high are we off the ground? And what's the weather like around me? And where are the other planes? You want to know more than that. So we're trying to build a dial that would be of use to somebody like the president of this country, or the mayor of a city, the governor of a state. And that's the plan. That's the plan for this instrument for now. Okay, so how does it work? Well, we started thinking about this with sort of the atomic structure of language with words. So we show people a list of words, one at a time, a word like sunshine, and we ask them, all right, raise your hand. This is about how many people we ask for each word in the room right now. How many of you think that sunshine is a 9 on a scale of happy to sad? Raise your hand if you feel like sunshine is a 9. All right, raise your hand if it's an 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so most people think it's between 7 and 8, and it averages out to be about 8. So sunshine's a fairly happy word. If I do the same experiment with the word the, we do that as well. We ask this many people, we pay this many people to tell us how happy they feel when they read the word the. It is rock solid at 5. Not surprisingly. And then, if you can look at the higher moments of these things. So a word like church, for example, people rate it all over the place. Something like the F word, people rate that all over the place. So those words average. The words that are very context dependent average out to the middle. They average out to around 5. But we can measure the standard deviation of those ratings to decide how people feel about them and those context-dependent words. So we collected the 10,000 most frequently used words in the English language through a variety of corpora. I'll show you what they were. And we performed this experiment and asked people how they felt when they read them. So here are some happy words. These were the happiest 30 words in our list. Lots of good stuff here. The standard deviations tended to be smaller when they're toward the ends of the spectrum. So lots of happy words here. This is their ranking in the first 5,000 of words people use on Twitter. Google scanned millions of books, so you can go and look there. New York Times articles for half a century, music lyrics for half a century, and we go and find these different sources of culture, just for English at this point. And then we ask people how they feel about them. So these are some sad words. This is down at the other end of the spectrum. Really horrible stuff. When people think about these words, independent of context, they're very negative. They rate them consistently as very negative. And all right, so the plan is we're going to look at all these words together. Here's some examples, some more examples. This is from words that appear in the New York Times. The 5,000 most frequently used words in the New York Times. You can see the little gray dots in the background are each individual words. Their position vertically is how frequently they're used. So up here at the top, these are words that are used a lot. No, not, the, we, knew. Those are words that are used frequently. And these are words that are used infrequently or down near the 5,000. And words that are happy, people rate happy. These are over here. Funny, excellent, succeeded, love, and loving are used more often. And then over here, these are sad words used less often down here, more often up here in the New York Times. So these are examples. The angle and the color is just to get your eye moving around. They don't mean anything, just the location means something. But then if you collapse everything down to get this distribution, there are more positive words than negative words in this top 5,000. So you see there's more yellow, that's stuff to the right of neutral, than gray, stuff to the left of neutral, even though the neutral words fall in the middle. And so we thought, all right, well maybe this is just the New York Times, which is kind of strange. Why would people talking about the news use more happy words than sad words? So we look at a bunch of other collections of text and put them all together. There's 10,000 words here, and this is just a histogram. So we're adding up all of the words that are, the, and of, they all fall in here. So there's a few of those. And then I showed you the list of the happiest words. They were out here, and I showed you the list of the saddest words. Put them all together, and we get this bias. So there are more happy words than sad words in this first 10,000 in the English language. Psychologists have been thinking about this for a while. Why is this the case? They have a name for it. It's called the Pollyanna hypothesis. That people generally will have sort of an optimistic view on life, and they'll, even though they're rating the neutral words, the, and of at 5, they tend to have this predisposition to want to get along. And this pro-social nature is really baked into the English language. So that was kind of exciting that we found this in this experiment, at least, that there's some evidence to support that hypothesis. We thought, well, let's check subsets of words. So we looked, people are writing on Twitter how much they love pancakes. So the same story there. There are more positive words than sad words on Twitter, and that's frequency independent. If you look down at the least frequently used words in that list, it still has that shape. It's still biased to be positive. True of music lyrics, books scanned by Google, New York Times articles, all in the English language so far. Okay, kind of exciting. So we went out and we asked native speakers of a dozen languages, rooms this size for each word, how do you feel about this particular word in your language? You've grown up speaking it. There are good tests that people performed to demonstrate that proficiency. And every single language we looked at, every corpus we looked at was biased positive. The neutral words all end up near 5, rock solid. There are lots of them, lots of neutral words. But there are more positive words than sad words, and that's true for all of the different corpora that we looked at. So it really does appear to be baked in to the way we communicate, this pro-social nature. This is not published yet, but we're excited about it. I have put up, at least for some of you near the front, you might be able to read this. So these are words in French. Again, that same sort of, we call these jellyfish flots. We got the distribution up top as the head and these little tendrils hanging down. Those are decyles. So these are words that are sad, used less frequently. This is the translation. When we take the words that people have rated in French and we translate them into another language and see how people in that other culture rated those words in their language, they correlate very strongly. There's a few concepts that really don't translate well. Google's working on that. Their translate software is not perfect, but the ratings are done by native speakers. Okay, so this is the atomic structure of our language. We're excited about the fact that people have more happy words to use than sad words. There could be some sort of evolutionary story there. If we were a culture that used negative words all the time, that wouldn't be so happy to talk about. But it turns out that those cultures don't appear in our list. We couldn't find a language, at least the ones we tested, where that was true. Maybe those cultures didn't survive. Maybe they were fighting all the time. We're trying to figure that out. Okay, that's a very complicated anthropological question. And okay, so how does this work? Here's I'm going to give you just a sketch for how our instrument works. We take, let's say, this is the example is, we take the 600,000 words that were spoken on Seinfeld over its 9 seasons. I've colored each word here in a particular scene between, this is Kramer doing something funny. I've colored the words based on how positive or negative they were according to our ratings from people. This is completely context independent. So Batman is a happy word. It's colored red. Words that we don't have scores for here are black. So Kramer wasn't one of the 10,000 most frequently used words in the English language. Gray words are neutral ones. We decide that between 4 and 6, those words we deem to be neutral, and we ignore them. So that includes words like the F word and all of its variants, because they're so context dependent, they average out. When we put it all together, so these 600,000 words in Seinfeld, and we go and look, well, Kramer spoke about 80,000 of those. We average the scores of his 80,000 words, throwing away the neutral ones, and the words we don't have scores for, and he ends up getting this average that's 5.9, and he's happier than Jerry. And we have a fancy word cloud, basically scientifically defensible word cloud that is produced by the instrument to see why this is the case. So Kramer is always calling people his buddy and talking about food and how much fun he's having going to the beach, where he can't play golf because he's hitting golf balls into the ocean. So this is what we do. We don't look at sentences or paragraphs. We look at a huge bag of words, and for that reason, it turns out the statistical tests we do to make sure this is okay. We could throw away a quarter of the words, and this trend is still here. We could randomly throw away a quarter of the words, do that millions of times, and decide how, these will each wiggle up and down a little bit depending on what words happen to be ignored. But the trend is still the same. That's the idea. We do those types of tests. So here's the instrument. We have text that we get online, what people are saying on Twitter, what people search for on Google. They tend to be a little more honest when they're searching Google than when they're posting to Twitter. What they're looking at, Bitly shortens links, New York Times articles, music lyrics, blogs. We feed all of that stuff into our computer. And this is our microscope for looking at the world. The dial, how many neutral words do we throw away? This is turning up and down the gain. So if you leave in all the neutral words, it's very muted. If you look at only the most extreme words, then the signal tends to be very, the amplitude goes way up. And then we look at the world. We look at different things. We look at how people communicate as a function of day. So these red and orange days are Fridays and Saturdays. People are happier on those days. A very regular weekly cycle. Take the FFT of this thing, and it's rock solid at 7, math people. On Mother's Day, we talk about happy and being with our mom. We curse less. These are dots, U.S. cities. There's no map here. Those are just dots for tweets. And we grab a bag big enough and say, hey, all of the words coming from the deep south here, they tend to be sadder than tweets coming from the coasts, cities from the coasts, putting them all together. And then we look at social networks. So you have a Facebook account. There are 500 people that you communicate with online. And the happiness that of your words, how does that relate to that of the people you're connected with? And how do you influence each other? These are things that we look at with our instrument. So this is the idea, and I'm going to show you some of the results that we get from measuring the world with this instrument. And hopefully by the end I'll convince you that it's a worthwhile exercise. So some things you're thinking that are difficult about what's going on. One is we don't have all the words. So I showed you there were black words up on the Seinfeld slide, including the word Kramer. And Ebola, for example, is a word that when we were doing that experiment, there weren't many people in the world with Ebola. And so that wasn't in the top 10,000 words. So there are phrases and words that we're not paying attention with. So the context is being ignored. We have experiments that we're doing to decide which phrases we should be scoring. So that's one of the next steps for this work, is to score phrases. And then as you move around the world, people's impressions of concepts is different. And they change in time. And that's something that another application for this is we really think of this hedonometer as producing a real-time, unsolicited public opinion poll. How do people feel about things? Just go and look at all the words they use surrounding that concept. And that can tell you about what's going on. But what we're looking at really is for big bags of words. That Seinfeld experiment was basically the smallest bag we looked at, just so that we could kind of explain what was going on. But usually it's millions and millions of words. I'll give you a sense of the size. So the first thing we did was look at music lyrics. What you're seeing here is a dot that is the average of all of the words, the average happiness of all the words authored by musical artists in that year. And what you see is actually, it's pretty depressing, right? The music is just getting sadder the whole time. So does anybody want to posit why this is? Sorry? There's more problems? More problems, okay. Yeah?
Measuring scale was developed in the 2000s, not the 1960s.
That's true. Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, I wonder how the word flower has changed over this period of time. So, again, there's a lot of cultural changes going on. There were wars going on back then, and things are different now. Yeah. So what we did to try and decide what's the deal is I wrote a script to go to iTunes database and assign a genre to every song, so that we could pull this apart, tease this curve apart, and now what you found basically is that every genre is stable, and this music that I loved growing up, this industrial music and rap music, that came along, it really wasn't around in the 60s. And it makes me really happy to listen to music that's got a ton of negative words in it. So that new stuff, that's rock solid. But so the trend coming down as a result of these new genres being explored, at least in this example. We found Metallica and Stained, these bands that they have, they're up towards the bottom of the list, and bands like the Beach Boys and Luther Vandross, they were near the top. Okay, so that was kind of a fun thing to do. We also looked at blogs. So this is this beautiful website built in 2006 by an artist named Jonathan Harris and a computer scientist named Sepp Kambar called We Feel Fine, and you can go online to wefeelfine.org to look at it. And what it did was it crawled through the web and found sentences that say I'm feeling, or I feel something, some emotion, and it would grab that particular sentence and any demographic information available and pictures if they were on the blog, and go put it in a database that we asked them if we could look at. And they shared their data with us. You could go and look. You can go on their website and find lovesick women in their 20s on cloudy days. This is 2006, February 14. This is Valentine's Day, which is typically kind of a bimodal day for people. Some people are psyched about it. Other people are lonely. So here are some example sentences. I feel so much of my dad alive in me that there isn't even room for me. It's back in 2005. I feel so bad with an awareness that I was one of the people who did that to our planet. I feel like I'm doomed to be only attractive to weirdos. I feel like the jacket needs some detailing and the tights don't really work. So there are some funny, strange things that people are talking about feeling, and some serious feelings they're expressing. But putting it all together, we had 10 million feelings expressed by 2 million people. And I'm just going to show you a couple pictures related to what we found. So this is a dot for every month. So take every feeling expressed, every sentence with a feeling in it. That's one of these gray dots. And the signals above and below, these are days that deviated a lot from the month that they live in. So 9/11 anniversaries, these were sad days relative to the month of September. Valentine's Day tends to be happy, but the word lonely is appearing a lot on that day. That's a negative word, appearing more. Holidays tended to be happy, and then the U.S. presidential election, people use the word proud a lot on that day, more so than any other day. It was the biggest spike upwards. Michael Jackson's death was a sad day. One thing you may have noticed, though, is that this is going up. This gray line is going up in time. And we were really unsure about what was going on there. And we talked to Jonathan Harris, who built this website, and it turns out that over this period of time, the teenagers who were blogging about how horrible middle school is, they went to Facebook. And so the saddest component of the population left. And the words that remained were authored by adults who were a little more stable, and so the happiness went up. Not because people were happier necessarily, but the subset of people we were looking at changed. And this is what we learned about age. So there is age information available for 2 million. There's 2 million people are represented in this picture. So teenagers, not so psyched. Then in the middle of people in the middle of their life using happier words, and towards the end of their life using sadder words. The bins are getting bigger. There are less people who are in their 80s blogging in mid-2000s. But if you go and ask people, this is some amazing experiments social psychologists do. Here's the experiment. I sit you down and I say, what makes you happy? And you write down on a piece of paper, I love going on vacations, and I love being with my family. And then they give you a little buzzer and send you out into the world. And the buzzer goes off at random times, and you write down what you're doing and how you feel. And amazingly, the things you're most happy doing are like the dishes and vacuuming and simple tasks that you can complete by yourself. This is what makes adults happy. So when you ask people how they feel as a function of how old they are, you get the exact opposite curve. You get a U-shape. And so people will report, they will answer this. What I was just describing is this day reconstruction, which you're not actually being asked the question, how happy are you right now? But so they do these surveys. People like places like Gallup do these surveys to ask you how you're doing. And people report being quite happy in the beginning of their life, less so in the middle, and happy at the end. And so we're really measuring something quite different from what they were measuring if we get this completely anti-correlated signal. And so the question of how accurate a representation of my emotional state is what I put online for the world to read versus what I say when I answer a question that a scientist is asking me or that I get on a phone call. These are two projections of me down onto a piece of paper. And neither of them is right. They're both important, I think. But this is one example. I'm going to show you lots of things today that you nod your head and you say, oh yeah, okay, industrial music. Horrible language. Of course it's going to be sad. But there are going to be other things like this where, wow, it's really different than what is sort of the conventional wisdom. Okay, so Twitter. When I first started this project, I used to ask people, how many of you have heard of Twitter? And it would be just crickets in the audience. In fact, we wrote to Twitter. There were 4 people working there. This was in 2008. And the guy who was their data guy wrote back to me and he said, "You've heard of Twitter?" And I said, "Yes, could we have your tweets?" And he said, "Sure. Fantastic. Here are the tweets." And he gave me a little pipe to download messages. And now, every day, we collect, Twitter people post to this service. They post 500 million messages a day. And if I took a Post-it note, and I wrote a tweet down on a Post-it note. Thanks, bud. Those 500 million tweets on Post-its would just wrap around the equator of the Earth. 500 million tweets a day, that would wrap around the equator if you wrote them on Post-its. And so we've been collecting these things since 2008. We get a random 10% of them to our computer. If we wanted to buy more, we could. But most universities, the deal is you can get a free 1%. But since I've got this deal going with the data guy who's not there anymore, we've been getting a random 10%. So it's about 150 gigabytes of text a day, for those of you who can appreciate that number. Several, 100 terabytes worth are sitting on computers near my office. And then I'm going to show you some experiments that we've done to look at them. So here are some good tweets. If you've never been on Twitter, there is some great stuff you're missing. Okay, Kanye West, "I make awesome decisions in bike stores." I mean, that's just fantastic stuff. How could you live without these things? Okay, this woman just the other day, "Oh, you're making an important phone call? Hold on, let me get my trumpet." Kids. And then, this is one of the great triumphs of science, that we landed a robot on a comet. This is crazy math and engineering. And that lander was tweeting, tweeting about how he landed once and flew up and was in the air for 2 hours and landed again. So that got some more retweets. Retweets is when you say, "I like this and I would like to forward it along to my followers." So these are some example tweets. There are lots of them. Here's another example tweet. Associated Press, breaking: 2 explosions in the White House and Barack Obama is injured. So this was a message posted to their account. There are 2 million people following the Associated Press's Twitter account. And 5 minutes after that was posted, the stock market dropped $100 billion. It's hard for me to really understand that number, but there's a big dip here. There's that to look at. I mean, it's hard to make that feel real. But this was a hack. The Syrian Electronic Army broke in and wrote this message, and then the AP tweeted a few minutes later, "Sorry, we were hacked." But the stock market, it rebounded, fortunately, when the news came out that this was just a fake. But if you're thinking to yourself, "Oh, Twitter's, it's just this weird thing, it's not important," $100 billion fortunately came back. So it can have an effect. This is what that tweet looked like on our computer. So breaking: 2 explosions in the White House, Obama's injured. There's a whole bunch of other stuff. This is actually a fairly compressed tweet. Usually it fills the whole page, the ones that come. There's information in here like how many people received it. So the followers count, that's roughly 2 million. That's how many people would receive that tweet when the Associated Press posts it. Lots of other things like if I post from a mobile phone, my location to within 3 meters on the Earth, if I've agreed to allow that information to be made public. Several hundred million people use this service. About 20% of Americans in the US, American adults, use it. And it's the demographics of Twitter use. It tended to skew young and in cities originally, and now it's I guess the socioeconomic status of the average Twitter user has been falling with time as the mobile phone technology has become more available. That's the computer that many people use when they can't afford a computer, and so there are lots of people using Twitter now. So what do they talk about when they have this cool Twitter machine? They talk about eating. That's one thing they do. So here are, this is just 24 hours. This is averaged over a few years. What frequency do people use these words? This is normalized so that these add up to 1. But so at lunchtime and at dinner, they talk about these concepts with roughly the same frequency, and at 2 a.m. So if you're up and you're hungry, you're talking about, you want chicken and you're starving. So one thing people do is talk about eating. That's fun. They also laugh. Here's an incredibly statistically rock solid straight line on a log plot. This is the ironic laugh. This is, I'm kind of excited about this. These tend to get happier for a little while. If you ask people, because these are words that people use on Twitter, we asked a room of people to rate them. And so things get happier for a little while. And then this is that's not as frequent, right? It's not often enough. I did, when I was making this picture, realize that no one had authored the perfect 70 HA tweet. So excitement. I went and authored one. There's now one. Let me see if I can get it back. There's one tweet with 70 HAs, and it was written by me. You can go do this now if you're a Twitter person in the audience. So there'd be 2. So people laugh. You can make beautiful maps. So here's a nice map. There's no borders here. This is just a dot for every tweet. And you see lots of what appear to be people, I'm sure, taking public transportation on a highway or a railway. That's what these things are, I'm hoping. This is a map of Europe. Lots of beautiful stuff. If you then go and look at the languages that people are using, it divides cultures beautifully, not necessarily on borders. It's really interesting. Here's a map of Montreal, just from a week worth of tweets. So you get a sense for where people are writing about stuff. Okay, so are we somewhere sort of in this area? Is that right?
More or less.
More or less? If I wave it big enough, I'll be right. Okay, good. Okay, so there's a website that you can go to MIT has this online interactive visualization of all the geolocated tweets that have been posted. So we use this information to try and make maps and understand what people are doing and where they're doing it and why. And so here's a map of Manhattan. Each dot is a tweet. You can see Central Park has less messages in the middle. There's lots of stuff happening on the street grids. There's some bridges. So we decided it'd be fun to go and look at trying to find, what's the happiest street corner in Manhattan. So we did this, and it turns out to be right near Central Park Lake and the Hayden Planetarium. And we had people from New York City writing, hundreds of people on our blog. Oh, I love that. That's my favorite corner in New York City. Of course, they'd been primed significantly by ours already naming it. But they were really excited about it. And so it was that. It was right near the Hayden Planetarium. I wrote to Neil deGrasse Tyson about this. He didn't write me back. Super disappointed. Okay, but I took my kids there. Kids, look at this. So I have my happiness generating units in the audience today. And we went to this street corner. And I am a part of my algorithm, right? Here I'm writing happy words, standing at the happiest spot in New York City. That was fun. So, but once we wrote this blog post, it sort of got out of hand. So this is the big screen in Times Square. This is a guy taking a picture of the screen. It's his picture that you're looking at. And it says Times Square is the happiest place in New York, according to scientists at the University of Vermont. So that's not true. But if it's on the big screen, it's got to be true, right? Okay. This is the city of Chicago. Happy words from the north side, sad words from the south side, generally divided right along the socioeconomic boundary where there's a lot of poverty. And so one of the ideas here is that we're going to try and be able to measure things about how people's behaviors are changing in response to new methods being put in place or public policies being implemented, where you won't have to wait 5 years to figure out what's going on. So Bloomberg, for example. I'm going to, Mayor Bloomberg in New York City, I'm going to, if you want 64 ounces of soda, I'm going to make you buy 4 16-ounce sodas. I'm going to cap the size of sodas at 16 ounces. Maybe you heard about this. And this is one of these social engineering moves that didn't play well. But the concept would be, we could really look if something like that was put in place. We wouldn't have to wait 5 years to see if the obesity results had changed or kids were exercising more or anything like this. We could just see, what words are people using, how are they changing over the course of a few weeks at the level of a neighborhood to try and understand what's going on. So we've made a map of the U.S. and ranked all the cities according to how happy the words were. Napa, California came out on top. This is a beautiful part of the world. Beaumont, Texas came in at the bottom of our list. I heard at least one laugh. Okay, maybe you're seeing a city you know. These cities now we have, I'll show you an interactive version of this where you can look as a function of year and soon weeks how happy these cities are. Flint, Michigan, that's sort of a classic down and out city. But again, this sort of got away from us. So Napa, California was the happiest place. Ellen DeGeneres ran a segment where she sent her comedian to Napa, California. Why are people happy there? She's going to go interview people. And Ellen cuts to her and she's completely drunk from the wine, because it's wine country. And she can't even ask people questions because she's so happy to be drunk. And people in Napa started tweeting about this, how happy they were. And look at this fantastic study. This is beautiful. We love Napa. And it raised their rating in our ranking. We're watching this. And Al Roker did a thing about this. It was great. But Beaumont did not like this. Beaumont, Texas. Eggheads find Beaumont is the saddest city. Capitalizing the is. I don't understand that. That's what some eggheads, we got it. Okay, I got the egghead thing at the Department of Math and Stat at the University of Mont have determined. This was the Beaumont reaction. And as you can imagine, people in Beaumont, this is bleep, 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 I can't bleep, bleep. Like everything online from Beaumont is horrible. And these are messages coming from that part of the world. So they have this is a positive feedback effect, right? Okay. So this was a post that somebody wrote this on our blog. This is a comment. I've lived in quite a few places. The most recently, Beaumont, Texas, is a pure hellhole. Hot, humid, trashy, terrible schools, corrupt government, lots of crime, no public parks or activities, terrible culture, other than crawfish boils. Don't forget about those. Completely lacks diversity. This study confirms my suspicion that cities don't get any more miserable than this. I'm not making this up. There were dozens of these posts from people. I had never been to Beaumont, so I felt bad that it ended up at the bottom of our list. But then it felt like, okay, well, there's something going on down there. People are writing this stuff. And then there was a backlash. So the Beaumont, like the mayor said, hey, this is not cool. We're starting a campaign. The lieutenant governor of Louisiana was the saddest state in the U.S. in our, from our instrument. And he started a campaign to try and make people happier online, use happier words so that Louisiana would, move above Mississippi or whatever, which was the next state over. Okay, so that's just kind of funny. But what can we learn from this? So I mentioned the concept of measuring how much soda people drink to try and understand where their health is going. So each of these dots is a city in the U.S. and its X location is what the percentage of obese citizens is in that city. So this is Boulder, Colorado, which is the least obese city in the U.S. Of this particular size. And then we just counted how often the word McDonald's was used. This isn't even about the happiness or anything. Just how often do people use the word McDonald's? So these correlated pretty well. There are lots of other words that correlate really well. And one of the big data concepts is to not really look at particular words you think are going to slice the data up and show you something interesting. But just look at every word, because there's enough information that you can do that. When you do that, you have to be careful about your statistics, and the p-values, the requirements for it to be a meaningful thing are much more stringent in those cases. But so brunch is the word that most strongly anti-correlates with obesity. So people who are talking about going to brunch tend to be writing from cities that are less obese. And then if you look at the words that that end up anti-correlating the most, they're expensive drinks. So people who are in cities where they talk about expensive drinks a lot, those cities tend to be less obese. And cities that talk about having heartburn and being starving and eating a lot of fast food, they tend to be cities that have a higher percentage of obese citizens. Maybe not that surprising, but really telling you something about what is it that drives. What is it what's causing the correlation here? These are this type of food is really not available to a large collection of people, and so there's a socioeconomic story here. Happiness anti-correlated with obesity, but a socioeconomic story. We clustered demographics, 500 demographics, and then correlated with happiness. And things like the percentage of citizens that are married in a city, or the percentage that work from home, the percentage with a college degree. These things positively correlated cities with happiness, and things like the percentage of female householders with no husband present in the family, those anti-correlated with happiness. But mostly, this cluster is mostly about poverty, and this cluster is mostly about a high socioeconomic and high education. This is what these cities have. So we still have work to do to try and figure out how to resolve at this scale what's going on. But that's something we're thinking about doing. So I mentioned states, and so Louisiana was the saddest state in our study. Each of these dots here is a state, and this is one of the important things is trying to decide, like, all right, what are we measuring? Like, how does this relate to what other people measure related to well-being? So you measure how many people die from a gunshot wound, okay? And so this is the X location here is for each state is how many people per 100,000 die of a gunshot wound, and the Y-axis is how happy the words from that state are. This was in 2011. So they correlate pretty well. That's -0.6. They anti-correlate. So the less people dying from guns, the happier the words. These are sort of more general well-being indices, Gallup's well-being survey. And so the state measurements of happiness tend to correlate pretty well. There's this behavioral score, which is our instrument doesn't really correlate at all with it, and it's the one that the Louisiana governor likes because this is the state of Louisiana here was the happiest state in that survey and the saddest in ours. So we're measuring a different thing, but we're trying to understand its relationship to these other more traditional survey-based methods. Okay, so what about time of day? These are repeated twice, so this is just to guide your eye, but as a function of time of day, this is the happiness. And people tend to be writing the happiest things when they wake up in the morning, get that injection of caffeine. And then from there on out, it's just downhill all day. Okay? We call this the daily unraveling. Okay? We need to reboot like a Windows machine at the end of the day. And this is profanity as a function of time of day. Exactly anti-correlated, right? So when you wake up in the morning, that's when profanity is at the minimum, and it just goes up all day, people's uses of profanity. This, by the way, does not drive this signal. You throw out the profanity from this signal, and it's identical. Okay, so what do people talk about on the weekend? So these are, on the right, this is sort of our word cloud for scientifically minded people. There's 4 ways words can contribute. You'll see up arrows and down arrows and left side and right side. So the up arrows over here, these are words people use more on Saturdays. So love, ha-ha, party, fun, Saturday, weekend, happy, ha-ha-ha. Okay, these are happy words used more often on Saturday. And the down arrows, these are words that are used less often on Saturday, and they're negative. So Saturday is used, on Saturday people use no, not, and don't less often. On Saturday they use negative words more often, last, bored, and drunk. These are things happening on Saturday, and they're fight. Those are words used more often on Saturday. Those are negative, so they go against this trend of Saturday being a happy day. They're on this side. And then those words no, don't, not. This is the type of thing our instrument reveals. We use more negative words on Tuesday. The filler, the stuff you would just ignore, the words no. The word no is used a lot more often on Tuesday than it is on Saturday. Now, you would never know that sort of thing before these social media things popped up and we could look at large-scale behavior like this. So it kind of makes sense. All right, so here's one example of this website that you can go to right now and interact with, this hedonometer.org website. And what we've done is made available our instruments ratings of every day since 2008. So what do I want to show you? So I want to show you, let's look at the whole thing, and I'll turn on Saturdays. So you can see Saturdays tend to be the happiest day of the week. Fridays are also happy. There are days that significantly deviate from the weekly cycle, which is incredibly regular. If I just scroll down here, you'll see that the red and the orange, the Friday and the Saturday, they tend to be very happy. And it's a very, very regular weekly cycle. The happiest days tend to be holidays that we anticipate. There was the wedding of Prince William and Kate Middleton. And the sad days tend to be days where a celebrity dies or there's a big natural disaster or something horrible happens in the world. And so you can go through here, and if you find a particular event or you're looking for a particular event, this is updated every day. We're trying to make it so that it updates automatically. There's an identification of events that has to happen, but something like the death of Robin Williams, this was a complicated day. People were talking about how sad it was that he was gone. They were also appreciating what he did for the world and how wonderful his movies were. There were a lot of remembrances of him that were happy on that day. overwhelmingly, though, a sad day. And if it's an event that pops out, we link to Wikipedia here. And so this is an interactive thing. It updates every day. Halloween was a happy day recently. We don't tend to see collective happiness where, everybody writing in, this is for English at the moment, everybody writing in English is happy on a particular day. Everyone can be sad on a particular, the words can be sad on a particular day. We think maybe, an outbreak of happiness could happen when a big sporting event or something like the comet landing. That's, that's sort of a worldwide event. But looking between cultures, how these time series vary, that's one thing we're working on. So here's an interactive map of the United States. And this is just for the last 7 days. So the state of Vermont, number 2 out of 51, where I come from. This is the second happiest state in the country, looking at 20 million words used in the whole U.S. over the last 7 days in the calculation, and 6 million words used. So we throw away a bunch, right? The neutral words and the ones we don't have scores for. The average happiness of the U.S. and then Vermont's happiness. Yeah, so that's the last 7 days. But you can go and look at 2013, 2012, and then there's lists of cities. So Boulder, Colorado tends to be one of the happier ones. Burlington. You'll be happy to know that. Beaumont, Texas is not at the bottom here. It's moved up. It's like 6th from the bottom or 7th from the bottom. But you can go and see which words people use more often in Boulder. So in Boulder, people are using the positive words: great, thanks, awesome, food, coffee, university, amazing. They're using these words more often, and they're using these words less often. So lots of profanity that is used in other parts of the U.S. is not being used in Boulder as much. So that's an interactive thing you can go play around with. This is. We looked at the state of Missouri when these protests were going on. Twitter was widely credited for being responsible for bringing attention to what had happened in Ferguson, Missouri, where an interaction between a police officer and this young black man resulted in his death, and it was ignored for a while. But so Missouri dropped by 20 spots from its usual ranking in the teens to 32 that week. And so it's one way to look at how much social unrest is happening and how it's spreading through the country. So I'm almost done. A couple more pictures. So we have distance from expected location. So when you move around the world and you're using your phone to write things, we can see how far you are from where you usually are. And it turns out that the further you are from home, the happier your words are. And the further you travel, the radius of gyration is a way to measure sort of how far do you move just on average. What's the standard deviation of your movement? And the further around you move, that increases your happiness. So this is actually, so math people, this is our hedonometer happiness measurement, which is linear. And this is a logarithmic axis. So happiness grows logarithmically with distance from expected location. Pretty good, right? Rock solid little line here. And there's lots of information in this geolocated stuff, but this is one thing we found. People are very regular with the way they move around. We can look in different parts of cities and decide, where are people visiting versus actually living there, based on, where their cluster of points usually lands. Because you might want to know, all right, Napa, okay, people are happy because they're on vacation there and they're drunk, okay, but what about the people who live there all the time? How are they doing? That's really the ultimate goal. We look at how many people are receiving your messages. So there are some sad folks who don't have any followers on Twitter. They're this little white square, which if they have 0 followers, they're way off to minus infinity on this axis. But we put them there anyway. And then so there's a transition here, right around 150 is this number of people that, the research on primates done by Robin Dunbar. That's about how many people we can really keep meaningful contact with in our brain. Any more than that, it's too much. And so there's a transition that happens, this little phase transition where when you're talking to thousands to tens of thousands to hundreds and millions of people, Justin Bieber's got probably 50 million people who receive his messages, and if he just coughs, 50,000 people retweet his messages. It's not so much you communicating with your friends as broadcasting a message, and so there's a real difference here in the populations. Okay, and then we look at you and your social network, the people who are connected to you, and the people you're not connected with but are connected to your friends, and then their friends. We look at these things and try and decide, how related are they? So we see what is your happiness relative to your friends, and we do that, and decide how correlated are they. So it turns out that your happiness and your friend's happiness, the words being used, are are well correlated, and then it dies off. So 3 links away is really the edge of your, or 4 links away is really the edge of your social universe, and you're unlikely to have an impact on each other. And then when we shuffle the network, keeping everybody's scores the same, we get no correlation. So it's not just because people are all talking in English about the same thing. All right, so really, I've mentioned this instrument. We're now trying to find other interesting ways to do it. There's this beautiful 3-minute, 4-minute piece, a video of a Kurt Vonnegut talk where he's talking about books and how there are these sort of motifs in books where if you think about all the stories, they could really collapse down into just a few things. There's sort of the boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl back again. That's a great story. And this is the Cinderella story, right? This girl has, her mom's died and her dad's married this horrible woman and the stepsisters, and it starts in this horrible emotional place. This is sad down here and happy up here. This is time, beginning and end. And so he gets, she gets the slippers and like the pumpkin wagon, and she's dancing and everything is fantastic, and then at midnight the dong 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 goes down and she's sad again, but then she gets the prince and like infinite happiness. That's an asymptote over there at the end. Okay, so we wanted to try and do this. So he mentioned this as a concept, but there are millions of books that have been scanned, and the Gutenberg Project has put a number of books up. People type in books from scratch. They type them in to avoid this copyright issue, and you can download those texts. So what you're looking at here is a sliding window of the happiness of all 7 Harry Potter books concatenated against each other. So this is, the first book is like right here, and then the second book's like right here, and you're sliding through, and I know some of you in the room haven't read it, and you're going to. So Cedric Diggory, Sirius Black, and then some very important characters near the end are dying. And so this is an interactive thing too. So if you go to Hedonometer, you can click on this link here, and you'll find the happiness of books. So here's the first book in Harry Potter. You can find all of these books. You can click on a random book, and these move around. So you can decide, what you think of different. Whether you think we got this right. So Crime and Punishment in English. Crime and Punishment is a sad story. But we also have it. So we asked people to rate Russian, and so we have Crime and Punishment where the words have been rated by Russian-speaking people, and if you click on these words, you'll see, oh, crime, that's used a lot. Okay, you can translate them, but the ratings are from people, and this correlates really well with the English version. So translation was, I guess, pretty good. So there's some classic books. We have movies too. They're not online yet, but thousands of movies, the scripts from thousands of movies, and we've built a little tool to have people annotate them. So if something happens and I know why that was what happened right there, you can go in and type that's coming, but you'll be able to go in and type what happened, and we're trying to figure out how to avoid having people put in really bad words, because free text on the internet is a nightmare. Don't read the comments. So anyway, if the words aren't used, we just basically are just going to keep it so that if the words are not used in the text itself, then they're not allowed to be put in an annotated event. All right, so finishing up here, what's our plan for the future? Some things we're thinking about. What's the largest outbreak of happiness? I mentioned sporting events. Those are exciting for people. But there's usually sort of like a zero-sum game there. Some cities are really happy and some aren't. It's a hockey game going on right now, right? How does happiness vary with proximity to nature? So we have this exciting collaboration going with Facebook where people are checking in to natural parks, and we can look at the week before and after and decide what effect did that have on you? Is there some sort of a halo of nature that surrounds you when you leave? And quantifying ecological economics is this field where you quantify the impact of bees on and their pollinating abilities on the economy. It helps people who are really into money and GDP understand why it's important to preserve things like that, and so that could be really helpful. Walmart. So we have all of the messages that have been written inside every Walmart in the U.S. because we know where those are, and you don't have to use the word Walmart. You've just written a message from inside Walmart, and so sorry to say this for the Walmart people, but the word hate is the word that people use the most when they're in Walmart. That's the dominant. If you look at our word graph thing, hate pops up. We did this experiment with McDonald's. We went and found everybody who visited a McDonald's and authored a tweet from there, looked at the week before and after that visit, and aggregated them all. people were sort of at this emotional minimum the day before they went to McDonald's. And then they went to McDonald's and things got better after that. So we're adding these other languages, so you'll be able to see how the French-speaking population on Twitter compares when something happens in the world. How does that population compare to other languages? Phrases, so we have a principled way now of deciding which phrases are the most important ones to score, and that'll be something we're moving towards. There's other emotions, of course, other than happiness. This is our surprise scale, okay? So I'm going to reveal to you now the least surprising word in the English language. Think about it for a second, so you have it in your head, the least surprising word. Beans. Beans is the word that, no, we didn't give him the, unfortunately, but beans was the word that ended up being the least surprising. We have an algorithm that watches 15 minutes of writing on Twitter, which is, we're looking at millions of words as they come in and thinking of those words as a population on an island, and there are good ecological measures for how diverse that population is, and we're using measures like that to decide if something is happening right now that's important. And the way that would reveal itself is if some population, some word, some species, all of a sudden started spiking when it really had never done that before. And so this is a concept called entropy. And when we ran, this was running, sitting on the computer running when the marathon bomber was located in Boston, and it picked up on his address, where he was, and found that phrase of his address before it was public on the news, before the CNN and New York Times reported it. People were listening to ham radios and typing on Twitter what the ham radios were saying from the police. And so we're thinking of trying to figure out ways to identify, rather than having to go in by hand and annotate, this is what was happening. There's a lot of tweets to read, so we don't want to have to do it ourselves. All right, so that's another thing we're working on. There's sort of lots of culture that I've ignored here that we could think about trying to quantify, and that's of interest to us. This is a sweating light bulb, lots of ideas. These are people that I work on this project with. So Peter Dodds and I run this group together. These are PhD, postdoctoral, some undergraduate students. The project has been funded largely by the National Science Foundation in the US and the MITRE Corporation, which is interested in this concept of gross domestic happiness and trying to understand how to measure how well different countries are doing. We have a blog, computational story, or compstorylab.org, where we talk about different things. The most recent post is about Seinfeld and trying to explain why Kramer's the happiest character. And then, of course, there's lots of scientific publications that are, if you want details on how this all works, I've totally skimmed over all that. But we do careful statistical tests to decide whether or not what we're saying is reasonable. So I want to thank all these folks. I want to thank the team who came with me today, Harper and Afton, my 7- and 9-year-old, and my wonderful wife, Kate. All of the happiness for me comes from this group. And thank you for listening.
Are there some questions?
Hi.
Very interesting, voyeuristic a bit, but fun.
We don't read any of the tweets ourselves.
Yeah.
The computer does it all. No, go ahead. Yeah.
You must keep the juicier ones.
Right, yeah.
Boulder, Colorado.
Yeah.
Would there be cultural bias because it's very Mormon, I think, or very religious up there?
Yeah, okay.
Maybe they're using less swear words, and they're not being happy, they're just not expressing it, they're stressed.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. So some of the cities that end up at the happiest end of the spectrum, they just don't use profanity very much. And Provo, Utah is one of those. So you mentioned Boulder, but if you go to this, where's the city list? So Provo, Utah is where Brigham Young University is, and that's where the Latter-day Saints Church is. And I went there to visit, and they don't. No one has caffeine. There's no coffee in the city, and there's no. There's a lot of sugar. There's no alcohol and no caffeine. And most of the undergrads are married by the time they're 18 or 19, and they're one of the happiest cities in the country, and consistently rate not just by us but by Boulder. This correlates very well with those other rankings of cities. So even if they are suppressing their the words they use online, it's not just the profanity that's contributing. There's I could throw all the profanity out, and they would use less negative language. And Is that why they end up, are they happier than the rest of the U.S. because they use less negative language? I'm definitely not trying to say that. But it correlates really well with the other measures of well-being. So it's a proxy, but it works pretty well. I totally understand what you're saying now. Yeah. This is weird. Yes?
Does your findings correlate with the happiness index in Bhutan? Do you know anything like that?
Right. So the country of Bhutan famously 40 years ago instituted this gross domestic happiness policy where their politicians would be judged on how well the population was doing. And we don't have the language spoken in Bhutan scored, and I don't know how many electronic texts that we could look at. So there's certainly large swaths of the population that we're not seeing, and even in the U.S. You have another? Am I getting your question wrong?
Yeah, no. I just wanted to say that if you ever consider looking at Bhutan, you also look at the minority that lives in Bhutan that has been expulsed and has become political refugees. So maybe their level of happiness is different from the Bhutanese happiness, right?
No, it's absolutely right. So one of the knocks that they've gotten is that they're kicking out the saddest, poorest people, and so good for you. I mean, maybe that's one way to do it, right? But not great. Yes. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. I have two questions. First is not so serious.
Okay.
Look at the data of people here in Montreal. How happy are people here?
Right. So the answer is our analysis of other languages is really, it's not ready for prime time, but we will be able to do both English and French speaking pop. You can look at both. Lots of people write. So when we look at tweets written from people in other countries, lots of them use many languages. So it's a complicated problem trying to tease out which one to apply, which lens to look at them with. But that's something that'll come. Right now it's U.S. cities, but within the next few years there's going to be a real-time signal for all the cities in the world that we can score for. Yeah. So I don't have an answer, unfortunately. Yeah.
My second question is about the example you mentioned about the fake AP tweet, which made the stock market goes down.
Yeah, right.
Okay, so it seems that the reaction is very fast.
Yes.
I guess there must be some kind of automatic market software which are doing this kind of automatic trade.
Yep.
So do you think your system can actually be used in this kind of financial system to predicate how the market is going and to actually make you rich?
Yeah, wouldn't that be nice? So the question is related to the stock market. It's definitely the case that there are high frequency trading algorithms that are since they run so fast, they have to be looking at only a few things. So they're not counting the appearance of the word bomb on Twitter, but they are monitoring herding movements between different indices that did respond, in that case, to actual people selling stocks. So this is a socio-technical system. They are coupled to each other. There are hedge funds that monitor tweets and decide based on the sentiment being expressed over the course of time whether they should buy or sell. And I'm not running one of those hedge funds. We're trying to make the world a better place for lots of people, but it is the case that people are looking at how to do that. There are companies that are trading with those strategies right now. Yeah. Yeah.
How do you account for semantic structure? Like in some culture, people may tend to say "I'm not sad" instead of "I'm happy."
Right. Yeah.
So in that sentence, if you can not and sad, it will be like double negative.
Yeah. Yeah.
But actually, the whole sentence is a positive sentence.
Yep. So this is the question is if somebody says I'm not sad, those are two negative words by the way we're doing things. What would happen in that case is if lots of people did that, those words would bubble up into the top of our list, and we would go and decide, is this a phrase that we should be scoring, rather than like the phrase not sad in some cultures might be positive. In the US, when we ask people to rate the phrase not happy, it's a fairly neutral phrase, and not sad is also fairly neutral in English. The occurrence of not happy in English is like 1 in 100. So when you look at how many times the word happy is used, how often is the word not sitting in front of it? And in English, it's just about 1 in 100. So So the phrase "not happy" would, then the word "not" would pull down that phrase a little bit. But again, we're trying to get away from the sentiment analysis. Is really hard. Computers aren't even as good as people don't even agree. 3/4 of people is a great agreement on sentiment, right? So that's a hard problem that we're not addressing. But that at the level of a huge bag of words, if it was a real problem, it would show up in this word shift, and we would have somebody who we would ask somebody, does this make any sense? And then we would have to retool and build a phrase-based sentiment for that phrase. Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah.
Is there a relationship between happiness and health?
Is there a relationship between happiness and health? Yeah. So the health index, we really only looked at obesity, but I can tell you that one of the other things that we're doing is we have another type of meter. This is sort of an emotion meter, but we have a calorie meter. So every time you use in Vermont, we use the word bacon a lot. So there are a lot of calories. Bacon, right? So we count how many calories are associated with each phrase, and then we count how many. So for every activity that you perform, like cooking is an activity, or skiing is an activity, or walking. So those things all have a calorie count that's negative associated with them. And so we add up the positive calories from the bacon and the pancakes and the maple syrup and the negative ones, and we get a flux for how many calories a city or a state is taking in or putting out. And that correlates very strongly with obesity, stronger than anything I've shown you here. So there are ways that we're thinking about trying to come up with measures of health based on phrases people are using. I'm sure that there's a big literature on the relationship between health and emotional health and happiness and physical health, what you're eating, how much exercise you're doing, and we're trying to see how we can answer questions related to it, but really haven't done too much with it yet. Yeah.
Referring to what you showed in terms of blogs for the average aged population that was happy when they're in the 40s,
yeah,
50s.
Right.
But if you ask them, they say actually the opposite.
Yeah.
Which one is more reliable, and why is it so that?
Yeah. So, there are two very different things that are happening. One is I'm expressing my opinion online, and I'm hoping that people will read it and share it. And there's some catharsis associated with that process. And it may be some attention-getting behavior. And then there's, what happens when I'm asked the question, how am I doing? And I stop for a second and imagine the last 24 hours of my life or the last week of my life. And that process is also incredibly dependent on what happened 30 seconds ago, what goes on in my brain at that moment. So they're really very different things. And I don't think that one of them is more important than the other. The fact that they disagree is really interesting. So people in the beginning of their life, they're self-reporting being happier. Maybe it is they don't have as many big deal problems. People in the middle of their life are, maybe their kids are gone at college and they can write online about their travels. So I could sell you a story about why the curves look the way they do, but I don't think that we have an answer yet for really why they're different.
Never mind, sorry.
Yeah. You want me to sell it?
Yes,
okay. At the end of your life, your health is failing. Okay, so you're using sad words. At the beginning of your life, lots of things are out of your control. Your parents are a pain, right? So you're using sad words.
It was not monotonous. It was convex.
That's right. Yeah. So in the middle of your life, your kids are gone, and you can travel and you can do things you haven't been able to do for 20 years.
Okay.
So
at the same time, when you self-rate, you say that you're less happy than the one who is.
Because you're smart. You have some intelligence behind that. In the middle of your life, you're aware of where you are in the spectrum, and it's life is not necessarily all. So I don't want to. I mean, there's an enormous behavioral economics has 20 years of literature about why it's a U shape, but I think we have to continue doing the types of things I've talked about to see why it is that our measure is different. We got to put people in brain machines and brain scanning machines and decide what is the relationship between how you feel and what you say about how you feel.
Okay, so I think one other people want to ask questions.
Yeah.
Okay, I have 3 or 4 more hands, and then we'll stop and have informal discussion with the vendor also. So I have some.
Okay.
Please speak loud.
I found it really tricky in the sense that, for example, you said that 5 is a negative word, and it's go up on Saturday.
Yeah.
I watch box, and all 5 are Saturday, so it's tricky because it's negative.
Yeah.
And in that sense, it's a score.
You mean boxing?
I'm not boxing, but I watch.
We watch boxing. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And also, what do you do about science people? I mean, on Twitter, I'm following lots of them.
Yeah.
And they do it, and they said exactly the contrary of what they
Right. There's a lot of subtle information in language, right? Yeah. Which is why sentiment analysis is an incredibly hard problem. You're right. So I can't tell you that we get sarcasm right, because we don't. And I can't tell you that, what percentage of people use the word fight in sort of a, I'm positive context. In other languages they do, actually. In English it's less so. The word fight has a connotation of, hope in it. In other languages, more so than in English, yeah. So the answer is that we do perform these tests where we throw away the word fight and a quarter of the other words randomly and see, does the trend stay? Is there still a weekly cycle? Is Saturday still happier than Tuesday? When I throw away fight and we do it, and we do it millions of times, and then we make sure that the trend is the same for all of them. It changes for sure, the magnitude and the position, but the trend is still the same. Saturday's rock solid, happier than Tuesdays, no matter how many words we ignore. And so that makes us feel okay about the trend. It doesn't make us feel okay. Like, I'm not saying that any of those digits on the y-axis of my plot that I'm, have resolution in the third digit for any of them. But, if you just imagine this curve, that it's reflecting. Yeah.
You were saying that, one of your bias of your study is that context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And my second question is because I'm a French speaker, sometimes I'm expressing myself in English, and for an English person, for me to mean something,
it falls flat. Yeah.
Another thing. Like,
Yeah.
For example, I've learned something that the word valorize
Mm-hmm.
is not the same. It doesn't mean the same even in American.
Mm-hmm. That's right, yeah. I totally agree, which is why we ask individuals from separate cultures how they feel about these words. So I don't ask French speakers how they... So yeah, absolutely. So the question is, how do we deal with cultural differences in language?
For example, there's a lot of person on Twitter that will tweet in English because they want you to understand. But if you take those words in English,
yes.
For example, I want to express something, but as an English person, you have to put parameter and you to another.
Yep.
It means something else.
Yeah. Right, so there's no way we can get at meaning, right? What we're doing is, so what you're asking me, basically, if I can analogize for a second, is can we measure the temperature of molecules, individual molecules in the room? And the answer is no. Because the quantity doesn't, it's not the question we're trying to answer. So can I get the temperature of this room right to within, 2 digits? Yeah, I can. But I'm not, there are going to be molecules doing very different things. And so at this level, we feel comfortable saying that it's giving us a signal. And with respect to culture, we do ask native speakers about their own language. And so, and then when we translate things, it tends to be like the Crime and Punishment translates very well emotionally, for example.
Talking about the Twitter
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't interact with the person, you don't know, just
That's right. Yeah. It's a good point. I agree. Yeah.
It's a little bit related. So again, we talk about bias. So have you thought about using like a preference instead of like a scale?
Yeah.
Because maybe some people are really happy and really sad, and other people are just a little bit happy and a little bit sad.
Yeah.
But now you're just cutting all the people and say you all got to fit on one scale.
Yes. So. Yeah. It's a good point. So, for example, in the summertime, we see this weekly cycle on the Twitter happiness dampens incredibly because people's weekends and weekdays, at least lots of people who are young and not in school during the summer, they kind of blend. And so the weekly cycle dampens. And it's an example where we see exactly what you're describing and how to relate everyone's individual spectrum That's something we've thought about, but we haven't implemented. I'll give you one other example. Men and women, if you look at all the men, the feelings expressed by men and all the feelings expressed by women, their average is very close. But women use words on either end of this emotional spectrum a lot more often. And men really stick. The emotional word for men is good. So the word is good. We use that to describe every emotion we're having. And the inflection is sort of, it's up and down a tiny bit. But the average is the same. So there's an example where you'd want to compare them on. You'd want that second moment of that second statistic, the variance, to give you some more information.
Also lead you off. Like for example, in the beginning you said that all cultures in general seem to be biased towards happiness.
Yeah.
But maybe your scale is just tilted actually.
Yeah.
So now you've forced it into some kind of like fat tail.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, the words are all neutral. The neutral words all score in the same place, though, in all those languages. So it's not it's not as though I'm because I'm a happy guy I score and as a 7. They really score right near neutral. Yeah.
It's not an argument against it.
Yeah. No, it's a good point. Yeah.
I'm just curious. You showed like in Chicago, the South versus the North, and the happiness scale.
Yeah.
Do you and your colleagues, are you more interested in that happiness portion? Would you pay more attention to what's making those folks happy, or like focus in on how the South End is a little bit unhappy, and what are the things that are promoting that, or is there generally like a bias in all your studies towards like not necessarily neglecting, but not seeing it as important as the happiness?
Yeah. So the question is just I guess your question is, what are we trying to get at when we look at areas? And I'd say that the answer is we want to get a feel for what the culture is like in those places, and we want to know what moves the dial there, what events in the world move the dial there up and down, and why. And so at this scale, all we can really do is look at which words are changing in time in those locations relative to other places. We can decide, go back and look at what's happening in the world then, and try and derive statistical relationships between them. So it's related to this concept of trying to give policymakers feedback at the neighborhood and week scale, as opposed to waiting. People are less obese 5 years later. Or the education rates are going up, or people are spelling words correctly more often 5 years later. We could do it in almost real time. That's the goal.
Yeah, the reason why I ask is just because those locations tend to be neglected in general.
Yeah.
And so if you are, like you were saying, some hedge funders are really interested in this question.
Yeah.
Because they will try and promote those happier regions, and then I just see it becoming less and less important as time proceeds. I don't know, I'm just curious.
Yeah. Well, Twitter is a great example of how populations that have never had a voice can have one. So something that happened in Ferguson, right? The news wasn't really paying attention to it, and then all of a sudden it was the biggest story in the world for a little while, and that's that's one of the great enabling powers that technology has given. But.
Shouting into a void that people do to try and handle their loneliness.
Yeah.
And so, as in terms of when you're saying we're not really measuring happiness, we're measuring something else.
Yeah.
That happiness.
Unrest, maybe, or
show up on Twitter, and it might account possibly for that concave convex thing, which is that you're actually happy when you're not on Twitter.
Right.
Too busy being happy.
Right. Why would you be posting a tweet when you're on the top of a mountain? Shouldn't you be just soaking it in? Yeah. No, it's a great point, and there are experiments being done now to see what effect this, having this access, what effect it has on us. And those are careful social psychology, control group and experimental group treatments that are going on for small populations. And we can't do that sort of thing at this scale. But as you said, it's an important thing to note that some people only tweet when they're happy. Some people only tweet when they're sad. They're all in here. They're all, it's a huge mess. And at the scale we're looking at, it appears to correlate with things that other people try and measure. But it says nothing about any individual. Yeah.
so it seems that it's stimulating. I will invite informal discussion because I think it could continue forever. So we thank the speaker again.
Thank you. Thank you very much.